Every generation believes it is different. They look at new technology. They look at new policies. They look at new leaders. The assumption is always the same. This time, we've learned. This time, we are smarter than the ones who came before us. Ray Dalio, through decades of navigating the most violent storms of Wall Street and studying centuries of economic data, learned something far less comforting. Systems don't learn. People do. But systems outlive people. This is the fundamental reason why economic cycles repeat with a precision that feels almost biological. It is not because history is lazy. It is because human incentives, driven by the same primitive brain that sought survival thousands of years ago, never change. We are currently living inside a massive, invisible machine that has been running for hundreds of years. Most people spend their entire lives being crushed by the gears of this machine without ever knowing it exists. They blame their boss, they blame the government, or they blame bad luck. But the reality is that they are simply out of sync with the cycle. If you don't know which gear is turning right now, you aren't a participant in the economy. You are the fuel. Ray Dalio observed this pattern not just in modern America, but across the rise and fall of every major empire in history. From the Dutch Empire in the 1600s to the British Empire in the 1800s and now the global dominance of the U.S. dollar. The names on the contracts change, the symbols on the currency change, the speed of communication moves from paper letters to fiber optic cables. But the human heart, alternating between periods of extreme greed and paralyzing fear, remains exactly the same. Think of the economy not as a complex mystery reserved for PhDs, but as a simple machine. A machine made of billions of transactions. Every time you buy a coffee, you are part of the machine. Every time a government prints $1 trillion, they are part of the machine. The cycle repeats because we have a fundamental flaw in our perception. We mistake credit for wealth. Wealth is what you actually have. Credit is what you promise to have later. In the beginning of a cycle, the two look identical. By the end, the gap between them creates the collapse that resets society. Every cycle begins with a beautiful, deceptive stability. This is what Dalio calls the early stage of the long-term debt cycle. In this phase, debt grows, but it grows in line with income. If you borrow $100,000 to start a business that produces $150,000 in value, the system is healthy. Productivity justifies the borrowing. The debt is an engine, not a burden. In this stage, the worker feels a slow, steady optimism. Jobs are available. Wages rise modestly but consistently. Security feels closer than ever. The investor feels confident. Returns look healthy and predictable. The system feels balanced because, for a moment, it actually is. But let's see who is looking at the structural numbers and who is still distracted by the daily narrative. The noise of the world is temporary. The rules of the cycle are eternal. Once you understand the rules, the same world starts producing different results for you. The worker who understands the cycle is no longer a slave to his paycheck. The investor who understands the cycle is no longer a victim of volatility. Human history is a series of repeats because the fundamental nature of man is a series of repeats. We seek more, we avoid pain. When credit makes life easier, we take it. When debt makes life harder, we look for someone to blame. To break this cycle in your own life, you must stop being a passenger in the system's emotions. You must become a mechanic of your own reality. Ray Dalio's greatest gift was not a formula for making money, but a lens for seeing reality without the filter of hope or fear. The loop continues. It is running right now as you listen to these words. Every second, transactions are being made, debts are being issued, and the clock is ticking toward the next reset. You can ignore the heartbeat of the machine, but you cannot escape the consequences of its pulse. Align yourself with the math. Align yourself with the cycle. Because when the loop finally closes, only those with the clarity to see it coming will remain standing. Once you see the rules, you can't unsee them. Which rule changed the way you see your bank account today? Which stage of the cycle do you see when you look out your window? I'll see you in the next stage of the loop. Imagine for a second that you are an observer looking down on humanity from space. You don't see individuals. You see massive flows of energy and resources. You see the debt rising like a tide across continents, and you see it receding just as inevitably. From that height, the individual tragedies of a market crash look like the changing of the leaves in autumn. It is a natural part of the process. The problem is that we live our lives on the ground, where the falling leaves look like the end of the forest. Dalio's perspective is an invitation to climb higher, to see that the struggle you feel in your daily life, the inflation, the job insecurity, the feeling that you are running faster just to stay in the same place, is not a personal failure. It is the friction of the machine. When the machine is in its expansion phase, the friction is low. Life feels effortless. When the machine enters its contraction phase, the friction becomes heat, and the heat becomes fire. If you are a worker, you must understand that your salary is a tiny cog in this machine. If the gear above you stops turning, your gear will stop too, no matter how much oil you apply. This is why financial literacy is not a luxury. It is a survival skill. It is the difference between being a sailor who knows how to read the clouds and a sailor who is surprised by every storm. Ray Dalio spent years teaching his employees at Bridgewater to be radical truth seekers. Why? Because the cycle punishes delusion. If you believe the market will always go up because it has gone up for the last 10 years, you are living in a delusion. If you believe your currency will always hold its value because it always has in your lifetime, you are ignoring 5,000 years of history. The cycle doesn't care about your beliefs. It only cares about the balance sheet. Think about the long-term debt cycle, which typically lasts between 75 and 100 years. This is the cycle of empires. It begins with a new world order, usually after a great conflict. A new currency becomes dominant. A new era of peace and productivity begins. For the first 50 years, everything feels like progress. Then, the debts start to pile up. The country starts spending more than it earns. It starts borrowing from its future to pay for its present. This is the stage where most developed nations find themselves today. We are at the point where the debt is so large it can never be paid back in real terms. It can only be inflated away or defaulted on. This is the end of the long-term loop. It is a period of great tension, both internal and external. It is a time when the gap between the rich and the poor becomes a canyon, and when social friction turns into political fire. Understanding this allows you to stop reacting to the headlines of the day and start preparing for the decade ahead. It allows you to see that the volatility we see in the world is not random chaos. It is the system trying to find a new equilibrium. It is the cycle doing its work. The question is not whether the cycle will complete its turn. It always does. The question is what kind of person you will be on the other side. Will you be someone who lost everything because you were holding on to the old world? Or will you be someone who recognized the shift and positioned yourself to be part of the new one? The system is not your enemy, and it is not your friend. It is a law of nature, as real as gravity and as predictable as the tides. You can fight gravity and fall, or you can understand gravity and build an airplane. You can fight the cycle and be crushed, or you can understand the cycle and build a legacy. Ray Dalio's principles are the blueprint for that airplane. They are the guide to the tides. As we close this 8th chapter of our journey, take a moment to look at your own map. Are you following the crowd into the storm, or are you watching the barometer? The loop is turning, the machine is pulsing. The only thing that remains is your choice. I will see you in the next video, where we will look at how the shift of empires changes the very ground we stand on. The cycle is eternal. Your preparation must be too.